Whenever we evaluate something, we must do so with the object's nature in mind. When I would try to evaluate a shooter, I need to look at these mechanics, and not how well it does as an RPG. My time at Sandrock is a survival sandbox RPG simulation that is heavily inspired by Harvest Moon or the way more better Stardew Valley. And it's in early access, and for this I lined up some goals for the video. What do you do in the game? How much grind is in the sandbox part? How buggy is it? Is it worth playing in early access, or what is the state of the game? And what about the story? Let me answer the first question. You acquire resources that you manufacture to different things, like furniture or buildings for commissions and missions. Some of the objects are for yourself. Let's take the dew collector for an example. You fell trees to get wood, kill monsters to get hide, and crush stones to get marble. You then process the wood to sticks, the hide to leather, and the marble to bricks, which you then combine on the assembly station. With better tools you get access to better resources, but the fundamental structure stays like this. For bigger projects you need more steps and more resources. From wood to hardwood, from stone to marble, from bronze to iron. In case of iron you also need main story progression. While the grind is the main part of the game, you could say it's even in the name sandbox, it's not my favorite. It's too much. It's not relaxing but stressing. Because you only have certain amount of energy and time at a day, you want to do commissions and use your energy and start processing your resources. This never lets up, and so let's take a look at Stardew Valley to show how it's done better. For the two cavemen who don't know what Stardew Valley is, it's a farming simulator where you mainly, but not exclusively, raise crops and sell the goods. This does oversimplify the game, but for this example it's sufficient. When you start, you place crops and use a watering can to start the growing process. Later in the game you can forge sprinklers, which will ease off the grind of watering, and you can use more of your time. In the late game, these sprinklers will be very effective. And if you want to be 100% effective, you might even change to a certain crop that only needs to be harvested every 7 days. You can also buy stone and many materials later for sheep, which means Stardew Valley uses its progression to reduce grinding. My time at Sandrock, which I will shorten to Sandrock because reading that out loud every time sounds stupid, does the opposite. You do more busy work. The dew collector we built earlier betrays its name and does only gather the dew. You do the collecting. You also micromanage your crops, your water level, which almost each of your processing stations needs. In the late game I was dreading to wake up. Not only get the processed resources, but also collect the dew, fill up the stations and the water, replace the crops, replace the straw because the game can't help itself, and then water each crop. Sandrock wants to be a relaxing game, which means there should be an inverse difficulty curve. When in Dark Souls each boss should be harder, then in Sandrock everything should become easier, not by the passage of time, but by the machinations you build. In Stardew Valley you could later even place a building that harvested crops automatically. Many players develop the effective disease, where we need to use every bit of the mechanics to produce more resources. In Stardew Valley many will use every bit of land, and in my case even install mods to have more land. The process of becoming that effective is fun, to be honest. But if you remain there, stagnating and nothing gets better, then it becomes hollow, a chore. It doesn't help that they introduced more RPG elements in Sandrock, because the perks, with very few exceptions, are next to useless. To answer the question, there is too much grind in the late game. For bugs, or to be more specific, problems, I have some more. I want to give the preliminary exclaimer that I'm aware that this is an early access game and that those bugs can be fixed in the future. But you should be aware that you need to point out every bug, so they really can be fixed. The most damaging one is probably the loading screens. Every loading screen takes minutes to complete, and I get flashbacks to Witcher 1 before the enhanced edition. What's worse is that many loading screens are unnecessary. For example, the commission board, which you will probably visit close to daily, is inside a building, while it could have been displayed outside like many of the shops are. Even if they reduce the loading screens to several seconds, it would still be too much loading, so I think that reducing the amount of loading screens is a viable and in some cases better approach. Some cutscenes and sometimes gameplay did stutter, especially with effects on the screen like sandstorms, lightning or fire. Luckily I had very few crashes, and if the game ran for more than 5 hours I had a memory leak. There are some instances when I alt-tapped out of the game and it started crashing seconds after getting back into it. I cannot show footage because I'm embarrassed of how untidy my desktop is, so you just have to take my word for it. Taking everything into consideration, I think the overall polish quality is fine. If I had to give out a score, it would be a 6 out of 10. 10 in that case would be an absolute bug-free experience and a 1 would be unplayable. Bugs and bug fixing are integral parts of early access, which brings me to my next point. What is the state of the game? I think the core features are developed and there is not something missing compared to my time at Portia, which is a good way to identify the integrity of development when you know about games that came before my time in Sandrock. First Planet Explorers, then my time at Portia. Early access is usually a risk. I, and most of you, have abandoned games in the library. You bought a game because it showed promise, and then the devs took off with the money. I don't see a chance for that in Sandrock, because Perfia Games, the developers, already made 2 other games, and to my knowledge, whenever a Kickstarter or Greenlight game betrayed its community, it usually was a first-time developer that had no history. But I have to confess something to you. I'm unfair. And so are you probably. Whenever I see a sequel, I think it should be better than the game that came before. Even though it has the same price tag. I cannot help to feel that way. I think Sandrock is currently about the level of my time at Portia, minus the story conclusion. With minor extras, but nothing special. But for the unfair me, that is not enough, and maybe the devs think so too. With that, let's go into the last part, story, which I combined with the citizens of Sandrock because how they are connected with each other. You arrive at Sandrock and are greeted by Jan, who is probably the least sympathetic character in Sandrock. He also has a mean Claire. He says the old builder Mason is retiring and you take over. Jan leads the Builders Guild, which is practically a mission distribution center. Over the first days you meet lots of townsfolk. Each one has a different personality and background, which is probably even more extensive than Stardew Valley. What I also like is that with each mission the town does change. When you repair a mill, a sign, a bench or make a cat house, those things stay in town. You shape the town with your hands. For interaction with the townsfolk, you can talk with them, give them gifts, play cards, or spar with them. Wait, is that a Dragon Slayer sword? Most of the citizens have connections to each other. Mian, as an example, is another builder that is friends with Elsie. And if you get to buddy status with Mian, you will get bonus points with Elsie. Our first task is getting equipment, a pickhammer and an axe. We also cannot cut down trees, at least before citizens, because it will damage the environment according to them, even though they regenerate literally the next day. Our next task is getting a recycler, which will turn scraps into useful resources. After this we find Jan in a predicament. He has been slacking off with a commission and we take it from him. Rocky, our local mining business owner, wants an elevator, which we built. Now we have access to the ruins and new resources. For a while we mine away and do some commissions. Then, during a sandstorm, the stage of the nearby saloon collapses and we get the mission to fix it. The job is split between us and Mian.
We are in a real jam here.
And we can take as much time as we want, which I did. The stage is then used for the farewell party of Mason, the old builder, who is one of the unfriendliest persons and doesn't seem to give a single shit about himself or the city.
A few words, Mason? It appears our dear Mason is overwhelmed with emotion. Come on, folks, let know.
Next we get a letter in which we are invited to learn farming. For that we need to visit the local hydro plant. But as we arrive, they are attacked by evil lizard interns. No really, all of the geeklas, those are the lizard men, have company positions as ranks. The damage is quite severe and we need to fix the farm. What I like is that this is not a separate issue. The next day the food prices increase and we get more commissions dealing with the crisis. For the core we need a special apparatus, which is in a ruin. Which reminds me I haven't talked about the world. You see, Sandrock, like Portia, is post-apocalyptic. I don't know if it's the same world as in Planet Explorers, but it seems likely. In the past, a war broke out, which destroyed civilizations, and after the apocalypse, the Church formed, which forbids certain technologies, as well as relics, to not repeat the past. Some, like us, still excavate parts from the ruins, and the world is much darker than it first seems to be. For an example, we find a journal of a girl in the ruins, which describes how her father and mother died. Then she slowly starved to death, as she apologizes to her parents and wishes everything to be normal again. Which actually resonated well with me. It's very interesting because the game seems very lighthearted and peaceful, but if you look a bit deeper, there's quite the amount of tragedy and darkness hidden beneath the sand. I will show that later in the character section. For now we find our relic. Alongside the repairs, we also discuss how to deal with the geeklas, who have become a real problem, and our plan is to drive them off or wipe them out. Because we don't want them to be warned, we use an old tram station to get to them, and we are tasked to build a tram. Before we do that, we finish the hydro plant and learn how to farm. Then we build a tram and set off. We are trapped inside the ruins and fight our way out. We find the president of the Geeklas, who says he wants to take over Sandrock because humans are evil, which is a bit of a contradiction. We fight him, but lose in the following cutscene.
Take my hand! Sandrock! Prepare to meet your new master!
It's a bit funny because the Geeklas took parts from the bridge, which now turns out to be the downfall, quite literally. We get rewarded, even though if we hadn't done anything, it would have still turned out that way. Of course, we now have a new problem. The bridge collapsed and we get most of our water from Portia and other cities. To help with the repairs, we forge trusses. But that's not enough. We also dive into a new ruin to develop a mobile suit to help with the bridge work.
Why are we here?
I've designed a power suit running on the R47 Power Core Ultra. It will greatly enhance the speed at which we can rebuild the bridge. It's a design I came up with at Vega 5, but I never believed we'd actually find the energy output to put it into practice. My inspiration for it comes from...
Isn't this one of the robots from that old world entertainment show? What was it?
We build it and finish the bridge, and an inspector comes and approves the work. Then we have an opening ceremony on literally the worst day possible. The stuttering is also a bit hard to swallow. After all of that, Burkrest, the naive church fanboy, makes a survey and finds out that everyone is stressed. So the city decides to make an event. I find this a good point to speak about the citizens of Sandrock. Pathia Games did an excellent job at making each character a character, not some soulless quest dispenser. Each one has a personality and some quite tragic backgrounds. Hugo lost his wife. Jasmine, the only child in the region, got left behind by her mother, the major. And Katori, the woman that wants to manage the event, divorced her husband and left her only child with her parents in a different city to make a game center in Sandrock. Even though she looks nice and talks friendly, she's a dark bitch deep down. I hope this is not an accident, because it's incredibly interesting to me to have this very happy and hopeful game on the forefront, while there is so much depressing background. Heidi is an architect that wants to improve the city. Matilda is a stand-in for the Major. Do not worry, I will not go through each character, but I see the success of the game by making me remember each one of them. The most interesting character did not even appear yet. You get to know them through side missions. Those are just glorified commissions, but have enough interaction between each character. With the exception of one. But that's for my story prediction in some minutes. For now, we want to hold an event. Before the event, Logan, the remote bandit, attacks and destroys the water tower, which endangers most of the townsfolk to dehydration. We saw him and his partner Haru earlier on wanted posters. Both were once citizens, but suddenly turned bandits. Elsie, the local farm girl, says she grew up with Logan, and there is no way that he's one of the bad guys. While we discuss how to repair the water tower, Elsie and Mian prepare to break into his old home by smashing a window. They are shocked that we saw them, even though an NPC walks right through the cutscene, which is very Skyrim-esque. We have to investigate the house, and I got stuck for a few minutes on the first picture because I didn't turn it. We find out much about him. First, he and Haru did plan the attacks and the escape, and also that he was very well liked in the town, with his father Howlett. We ask each town person about the night everything went down, and a picture forms. Howlett and his son Logan were monster hunters, and on one night his father went deep down into the temple, which is presumably an old ruin. Then Miguel, the priest of the church, sealed him off because he got contaminated. Logan pleaded and raged to free his father, but Miguel still said no. He then used violence, and many argue that he wanted to blow up the entrance to free his father, which killed him. Then Logan went and became a bandit over grief and revenge. I don't think that's true for several reasons. Of course there is this big meta reason. You got a quest finding out more about Logan. It would be a big surprise that after all this investigation everything is as it seems, and he just went nuts. My theory is that the cause of all this is Miguel, the priest of the town. First, there is a conflict of interests. Priests in this world believe that relics should not be used, and monster hunters, like Howlett, do excavate relics from ruins. I bet Howlett was forbidden to dive into the temple, but did so anyway. Maybe there is something to fix the water situation in Sandrock in the ruins. There's also power relation. Conspiracies, no matter if real or made up by Trump, always involve people of power. It does never work with people of equal standing. Let's say Owen, the owner of the saloon, plans to kill Avio, the owner of the woodwork shop. He reports this to the police, they find out the same stuff and everything gets resolved. But if someone higher up does this, you cannot report this, because the civil corps, in essence the fusion of army and police, works for them. The power is distributed in this way in Sandrock. Miguel, the priest, Matilda, the minister, and the absent major, and below those three, everyone else. We can exclude the major because she is absent. And so we need to find out, is it Matilda or Miguel? While Miguel has a motive because of the conflict of interest, Matilda has none. Quite the opposite, because a skilled hunter is a benefit for the city. There's also the possibility that those two work with each other, maybe to keep the major missing. For less rewarding reasons, we have meta stuff. This is how you investigate the clues. You ask a citizen about the night the tragedy happened, then show a photo. This is Owen, this is Savio, this is Matilda, and everyone else. And this is Miguel. Miguel is the only one who has a different dialogue structure. Another one is events. There are numerous characters involved in quests, but almost none for Miguel. This is also in other games a way to find out which character is dying. If the character is not involved with any side quests, never appears in scenes he would have a reason to, you can pretty much guess that the character in question is as good as dead. Developers don't like to waste effort. Most humans don't. And making a character really involved, voice act him, and in the end the player almost sees none of this, because he died before the player could do the quest, is not satisfying, neither for the player nor for the developer. So they choose a character to die beforehand, and put the least amount of effort into him, because he or she will be dead soon. For me, Miguel seems to be the most likely person to be replaced, and there are enough in-game clues to support this. After this, the game is over. You fix the water tower, and that's the end, for now, because it's still in development. I do think the state of the game is sufficient for its price tag. There's enough polish and content to justify a purchase. I think the biggest game breaker is the grindiness that never lets up. I didn't speak of the combat, because it's just pressing the attack button endlessly, which makes it non-existent for me. I think you should try out Sandrock. Farewell.